at La Trappe, we had a link with the Carmel of Lisieux, which wasn't far away. When I was 20, I remember praying for a good while before the Blessed Sacrament next to the by then 90-year-old Don Marie Bernard. He was the great sculptor of La Trappe, who did the original of Thérèse of Lisieux with the roses and the crucifix. He also contrived a machine to reproduce things, still working now, long after he is gone. The statue has gone round the world and is the standard one of her. But he had a personal link with the community insofar as he had, in his younger days, for a long time been close in correspondence to the superior of the monastery, the Pauline of the manuscript, Mother Agnes. But she, before she died, had asked that all the correspondence be destroyed, so it has all been swallowed up in Trappist silence and obscurity. It just happened that our abbot was very much into her spirituality and was constantly making reference to her and to her teaching. And one year we had the 8 days annual retreat based on her, given very well by the then world expert on her spirituality. And so we had the inside story, with also bits added which weren't generally known. Her activity not only before but after death. She would sometimes intervene, as it were, physically. For instance, a lady in dire distress was coming to some height of bureaucracy in India or somewhere and didn't know what to do. And then when she got in, the gentleman behind the counter said, "Well, as it happens, a nun has just been here to sort out your problem." Oh. And it turned out that he recognized her from something that she had with her. It was Thérèse of Lisieux, long after her death. And so these interventions we were aware of. Indeed, when we would invoke her, she would do things. One year the novitiate for the abbot's feast or something did a play on her. It was based on a good, well-researched bit of writing, Briser la statue, breaking the statue, that is the real Thérèse. And it brought out also the way in which there was a whole plan inside there. Leonie tried also the Carmel, but she found her vocation with the visitation nuns. The whole family, of course, was consecrated to the Lord. The last to come in was the one who looked after the father to the end, Céline. And we had also at La Trappe read for a few weeks the whole life of the parents, Louis and Zélie. And as we now know, they were very holy parents. It was a domestic church. God reigned therein. And it is fitting that such couples should be raised to the honour of the altar, that they may be given as models for ordinary people. What the Second Vatican Council was trying to get through with the teaching on the universal call to sanctity, and what John Paul II referred to in Novo Millennio Ineunte, when he declared to ask for baptism is to ask to become a saint. There is therefore no category A and category B, those who just make it and those who go all the way. To follow Christ is to become a tabernacle of the Most High and to live out its consequences, as Saint Francois de Sales pointed out, according to one's state of life. There is a perfection for every state of life. and it's not right to mingle the two in the sense that, as he points out, the bishop who tries to live as a Carthusian is not faithful to his specific role. So there she was, and one day the abbot asked me to accompany an American Trappist who was returning to his American monastery, but wanted to pay a visit to Thérèse of Lisieux before he went back. And so I was able to show him where she had lived before we put him on the train, Le Buissonnet, the family home, and the place, of course, where she sat with her father and asked his consent. There's a little statue there, and he allowed her to go in, though he was hurting inside, his little princess. And we saw also the monastery at Caen, where she had been educated. In fact, that's where we had something to eat. That's a Benedictine monastery, which had been largely destroyed during the war because Caen was badly damaged. There was a ferocious counterattack by the Germans there after the débarquement, which failed, of course, but was pretty damaging. And also the place where her remains are, in Lisieux itself, the monastery. We had Holy Mass there. And we know that whereas the monastery of Caen had to be rebuilt to a large extent, the one at Lisieux was miraculously protected. There was a nun who, during the ferocious fighting, was looking at what was going on through a chink in the wall, and through the chink came an obus, and whizzed past her nose, but didn't do any damage. There was no damage at all, miraculously, to the monastery itself, so it's still standing as it was. And that same protection also came to La Trappe, and the same Thomas Bernard chiseled the huge statue Notre-Dame de la Confiance, Our Lady of Confidence, on the hill protecting La Trappe, and had underneath on the plinth Ipsa protegente non timebis, from Bernard of Clairvaux. With her protecting you, you will have nothing to fear. The bombs had spared La Trappe also. And so she is there, and she does things, as can be seen from that other place which one goes to at Lisieux on the hill, the huge basilica, which is very impressive. And on it we have these mosaics and her promise with regard to the showering of roses. And by the way, when she was canonized, a shower of roses did come down from heaven. I had one for a long time. I'm not quite sure where it's gone with moving around, but I was given one by a child who had it from his uncle, and it was authentic. They came from the sky. But those are also symbolic of what happens in general, and we have often surprises, a rose coming out of somewhere when Thérèse is involved. But that promise is there, and it's on the dome of the great basilica in Lisieux. Je vais passer mon ciel à faire du bien sur la terre. I'm going to spend my heaven doing good upon earth. And she answers that. She is faithful to it. When we invoke her sincerely, she does do things. Remember, actually, after the course of lectures that we'd had there on Thérèse, I had a job to do something and I couldn't get it done. I remember whispering to the one who was in charge of that department that I'd invoked her at a certain point, and suddenly it worked. She actually died yesterday, the 30th of September. It's on this day that she's now honoured. She was only 24. I also read in some detail the details of her slow death, l'agonie, the agony of St. Thérèse of Lisieux, and it's quite interesting. She realized, of course, what was going on. There's a certain similarity with regard to what happened to John Keats. He was only 26, and he was a medical student. When he started to cough up blood, he knew what it meant. By the way, Therese herself did write a little bit of poetry. It's quite interesting. And in the play that we put on, that was coming through, the temptation to think that she might have been somebody in the world. And Ferrugue, who eventually became abbot of Notre-Dame-des-Neiges, he had to be the one who was the virtual Therese in her dreams. Very psychologically accurate, probably. And Therese herself was a woman of some verve. She was able to write and act plays. The Carmel has a tradition of that kind of thing, even to this day. And we have, because Providence had brought into that monastery an early camera, one of the sisters had one, we have all kinds of pictures of life in there, including one of her acting out a play that she had written on another great young French damsel, Joan of Arc. She's there pictured with her own hair in a prison, chained up. It's very interesting. And one sees there that she was a complete woman. And that comes out also in her teaching given to the novices. She was a very good novice mistress, but she wouldn't let anything pass. She corrected and she went to business, but always with charity. She herself, losing her mother early in life, did go into some kind of depression, or it could have been mental illness nearly, but she was cured miraculously. And we have this strange event of the Notre-Dame, la Vierge du Sourire, the smile of the Virgin in the statue, which still showed one. There's a statue there which smiled, and she was healed. And she overcame what could have been what is referred to in French as la névralgie, a certain scrupulousness, nervousness, completely by grace. It could have gone the other way, and she could have turned in on herself, but she had the victory. And indeed, there is a trait of humor which comes through as well. That comes through in some of her writings, and also in the way in which she was quite bright even when she was in terrible pain. One time the doctor was to come in, and she said, "I'll take a whole pint of milk, because milk always makes me look more awful." And she meant that she was, as it were, trying to face the doctor with a twinkle in her eye. The way in which she became a saint came out very quickly in the teaching given by the expert that we had for 8 days. It was something that was being proposed to us as well. It was the way in which, without drawing attention to oneself, one becomes heroically saintly in the sanctity of the invisible. Because to draw attention to oneself is to fail miserably and to deflect what actually is meant for the Lord. True sanctity is not noticed. And so she was able to ingest and take in the pain of always being annoyed. In fact, way after her death, the sister who is referred to as the one that had the gift of annoying her in all things, she had written this essay, Memories of a Cherished Friendship, and she had the audacity to ask one day, who was that nun that always annoyed Therese? And what was her surprise when it turned out, "Mais ma sœur, c'était vous." My sister, it was you. What? She hadn't the slightest inkling. So good was the hidden sanctity of this Therese that she wasn't able to even detect it, the other one. And that is something that one can practice, not showing irritation. With regard to her interior tension, she was wanting to do many things for the Lord, and we see that coming through until she finds in St. Paul the resolution of the conflict, when she realizes that her vocation is to be the heart. There is in the mystical body a heart, And that's picked up also by Pius XI, the Pope of the Missions. He has actually a document which is important to the Carthusians to this day, Umbra Tilem Vitam, a hidden life, a shaded life, in which he indicates that without the prayer and penance of the contemplatives, the missions have very meagre fruit. And she understood that perfectly. And so it is that we have this famous saying coming through, which is read every year at vigils, the office of readings, Dans le cœur de ma mère, l'Église, je serai l'amour. In the heart of my mother, the church, I will be love. That's what she was asked to do, and she did it. But she did it well because her heart was not contaminated by unpleasantness. She understood that one cannot love God unless the heart is also in love on the human level, because it's the same organ that is functioning. And also, to love God means that one is content to please God alone. And therefore, this element of purity of intention, not seeking glory or attention, is important. To draw attention to oneself willingly is to show that we are serving ourselves. With regard to her spirituality, it's not complex, it's made of intimacy. And it's important to remember that in the context in which she was writing in the 1800s. There could have been a certain tendency to look at God as a policeman still. She had a spouse, and that was enough for her. And her kindness we can imitate. It's captured in the pictures. There was a goodness in her regard. As the great oratorian wrote, not so far from her in time actually, William Faber, kind words are the music of the world. A being made of love to all that come within its magic rays, always the same, always a friend, where friend can find a home. An overtone, born by a little name. This is to be alive, and to be there, in that small corner of the universe, where we were set a while. Await to share with one or two who wanted to converse. For there are two great forces in the earth that can both heal and harm, that can do all that need be done to make one life of worth. The one is silence, the other sound withal. And there can be a presence in a soul that in soft glowing made some being whole.